Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me back there? Alrighty. Okay, pop quiz. Some of you know the answer to this question, and if you know the answer, don't answer. Okay. That's sort of a trick question. Okay. What do you think is the largest production Active Directory deployment out there in terms of number of users? Number of users in a single forest. Anybody got a guess? Give me a guess. Anyone?
Real or simulated?
Real production, live, serving customers. Go ahead. What do you think? How many? 375,000. 370. That's a pretty big directory. I'm glad to hear about that one, by the way. We should talk at the end. No, actually, there's a production Active Directory deployment out there that has 6 million users in it. 6 million users. It grows by about 10,000 users a day. Okay, you may be surprised to hear. Okay, where is it? I'm not sure if I can tell you the name of the customer, unfortunately. But believe you me, we've talked to them, and it's running. We consider that sort of be a flagship scenario, so we talk with them on a regular basis. Let me ask you another question. That was scale up, so in terms of number of users, number of objects. What do you think is the biggest Active Directory deployment today in terms of number of domain controllers? How many domain controllers in a single forest? Any guesses? It's probably going to be closer this time. Anybody? 2,500. Yeah, I seem to scare people when I say 5 million, you know, for the users, so they inflate their number for the second one. Actually, it's about 12 to 1,300. 12 to 1,300 DCs in a single forest, so pretty big. I like to bring those numbers up at the beginning of the presentation because it kind of gives people an idea of, you know, where are we really at? Where are we really at with Active Directory? The product group could do a better job of telling people about, you know, the sort of this breadth and the scope of the implementations that are out there today so that you can feel more comfortable with it. What I'd like to do today, my name is Stuart Kwan. I'm the group program manager for the Active Directory development team. I have a team of program managers that does requirements definition and design for the Active Directory product. So we kind of work with customers to decide what should go in the product and what it should look like, and then work with developers to see what's possible and probable, and work with testers as well, the quality assurance people. So we help shape what the product looks like in general by working very closely with customers. What I'd like to talk about today is the strategy and the vision for the Active Directory moving forward. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about where Active Directory is today, Windows 2000, state of the directory. Talk about what's going on that's new in Windows.NET Server with respect to Active Directory, and then moving a little bit beyond that to the cool things that we're thinking about for releases beyond that. And there's going to be some stuff, I hope, that surprises you, some stuff you've never heard before. And I hope that you feel that when we reach the end of the presentation that you feel the same way we do, and that is that right now Microsoft understands the directory business as well as we've ever understood it, much better than we understood it 2 years ago, 4 years ago, and that our strategy, both a technical strategy and a business strategy, is one that will lead the industry in the directory space. So I hope that you can reach those conclusions as well by the time we get to the end of the presentation. Let me begin by talking about vision overall and the way that we sort of shape our thinking in the Active Directory group in terms of what we're building. We see the directory in 3 distinct roles today, and these are probably not the roles that you usually expect to see when someone puts directory roles up. The popular taxonomy before was network operating system directory, enterprise directory, and outward-facing directory. Anybody ever heard of that before? A couple, maybe? Maybe not. Okay, well, the way that we look at the directory space is in terms of these 3 roles, and that is the network operating system directory, a thing that we call the application directory, and the meta directory. And the network operating system directory is the thing that you imagine it is. It's the one that is sent out onto the network to manage Windows PCs and manage the traditional file and print assets, and to lock down PCs, etc. The application directory is one where you have a specific application that needs directory functionality, and you've deployed it in order to satisfy the needs of that directory. And an example at a high level of an application that uses an application directory is Exchange 2000. It uses the Active Directory as an address for address book, Also uses it for some configuration and stuff like that. PKI is another example. In order for PKI to work, you have to have a place where people can come and get public keys. So an application directory is a popular place to put those things. Metadirectory is, of course, in our view, about a couple of things. It's about aggregation. It's about taking data from stores that aren't directories and putting them into directories, maybe application directories, so that you have a common way of accessing that data instead of having to know the specifics of a certain database. So it sort of standardizes the way you look at things. The metadirectory moves the data around. It keeps the data up to date, and it can also play a role in terms of provisioning. So if you have all these different data sources and you want to be able to make a change in one place, say you want to hire someone, you want to add them in one place and then have that fan out, the metadirectory can play that role as well in the provisioning space. So this is the way that we look at the directory roles today. It shapes our thinking. And you're probably wondering, well, what happened to the enterprise directory? And what really is the enterprise directory? And let's talk about that for a moment. This is the vision of the enterprise directory. The vision of the enterprise directory is that you can have one directory in your corporation, one single directory that is then reused many times by many different applications. But it provides a centralization point so that there's one thing that you have to manage, and then everyone can leverage it. It's a wonderful, wonderful vision. And it's also something that we call, in many cases, the myth of the enterprise directory. Does anybody actually have one of these or seen one of them? Built one? Anybody? Anybody built one? Yeah, a couple. Okay, it does happen. It does happen. But in many cases, that's not what happens. This is something more like what happens. And especially in a large organization. Let's say in a large organization, I have a division or a department, and they want to deploy an application that needs a directory. Well, what are the odds that they're actually going to go back and find out about the enterprise directory? Or ask for an enterprise directory to be built? Chances are they're just going to deploy a directory on their own, right? Because then they have control over it, their application can be connected up to it, and they don't have to worry about talking to anyone else. In fact, the way that they talk to other people, the way they get data into their directory, is by using some sort of sync mechanism, some sort of maybe even ad hoc sync mechanism. They get a dump with a file in it, a file with a dump of users in it or something. They use that to populate their directory. And that directory is the application directory. And we see proliferations of these inside companies. Many, many application directories in the various departments. And you know what? These departments don't talk to each other and don't even know that it's happening. It just happens. It grows up like weeds. Sometimes in these spaces, a metadirectory is used. So an organization which has the epiphany that, hey, we have all these application directories and the data is getting out of date in various different places, they actually employ a metadirectory to keep the data synchronized. So they sort of reach the next level of consciousness. But this is really where it's at in terms of the enterprise directory today. It really ends up being many application directories. Now, if you look at these different roles, they have varying requirements. Let's take a look at the NOS directory. The NOS directory traditionally has that big scale-out requirement, right? Lots and lots of domain controllers all over the network. The application directory doesn't have that scale-out requirement. Typically, it's, okay, well, I have this application that runs in 1 or 2 locations. Maybe I need 2 copies of the directory for redundancy, but that's it. So it doesn't have that scale-out requirement. Neither does usually the metadirectory. The metadirectory doesn't have a big scale-out requirement. But if you look at, say, another dimension, there are 3 dimensions here, the scale-out or the replication needs, the scale-up or a number of objects in terms of number of objects you'd have in it, and then also the richness of the data that you place in it. Let's take a look at something like the application directory and its scale-up requirements. Remember that 5 million user directory I mentioned? That 5 million user directory is not a network operating system directory. It's an application directory. It's actually being driven by Exchange 2000. It's a hosted Exchange 2000 install. And they have this tremendous scale-up need for lots and lots of objects, but they don't have a big replication need in terms of scale-out across many, many locations. It's all run in a big data center. So there's a wide variety of requirements across all these roles. And our vision, and this is key to everything that we do when we think about developing directories, our vision is, even if you have these many roles, and even if they have these many requirements, you only need one directory technology to get your job done. and that we're going to build that one directory technology. And I'll talk about what that means as we go forward, but that's really our vision. And when you think about it, what are the obvious benefits of having one technology that can do all these different things? Well, if you have one technology, then you can have one programming model, one set of development tools, one set of operational procedures, one skill set, one set of expertise that you can apply across all the many directories that you'd have at your organization. And that means you save costs in the long run. If you had to deploy different kinds of directories for each of these different roles, then you'd have to learn how to back up and restore in different kinds of directories. And that just means you're going to have that much extra expertise and that much more you're going to have to pay people to be able to do that, and that much more likely that you're going to get it wrong when you actually have to do it because of the mix of expertise. So that is really our goal, and that's what we're driving toward. The way that we get there involves four very distinct points. And these are the ones that the Active Directory team is going to live by as we move forward with the directory. Number one, of course, we're going to build that technology that can meet all those different requirements. And you might be thinking to yourself, wow, that sounds like a daunting task, and it is a very big technical challenge for us, but we think we know how to do it. I'll talk a little bit about that. The second thing is, you have to tell people how they deploy it. You have to tell people how they run it in very simple terms. Don't give them a 1,200-page reference manual and expect them to figure it out for themselves. Not going to work. Enterprise technology, you need very simple ways of running it. The third key is having the best developer tools. If you have the best developer tools, then developers will come to you to build applications on your directory. It's as simple as that. They want to be able to make their applications and evolve their applications as fast as possible. That applies both to the shrink-wrap ISV. It applies to the corporate developer. It especially applies to the corporate developer who wants to build a directory-enabled app. If they're left with a C API versus a scriptable mechanism from Visual Basic.net, there's some pretty big pros and cons to each approach. So high productivity developer tools, very important. And last of all, and we've said this a lot. I mean, if you've heard me speak before, you've heard me give the analogies about how the directory business is one that people don't buy directory for directory, right? They buy directory because there's an application they want to deploy that needs a directory. I've said that before, but now the directory team is going to put its money where its mouth is. We are going to partner with all those people that we think are key to get our technology deployed. And that means ISVs, it means the system integrators, it means the migration vendors, it means all those. We want to sign up with you and figure out how you can best work with us to create that synergy so that your stuff gets deployed and it pulls ours along with it, right? A funny thing happened when we were doing some of this analysis in terms of the way directories deployed, especially the application directory market. Think about the application directory market. It's one where I've got some application that needs a directory. Well, if you walk up to a typical customer, and I've done this before, it's funny, you have these amazing epiphanies on the phone with a customer. I was talking with one and they said, I was like, well, what directory are you choosing to deploy? We use the term enterprise directory because that was the one they understood. And they said, well, I'm just using what the system integrator is telling me that works best, right? And what the system integrator has chosen is the one they're most comfortable with, right? And they're most comfortable with it because they have a good tie with the vendor of the directory, right? So you go to buy an application, maybe a web single sign-on product from Integrity, and if you're just an ordinary customer, you go, well, okay, what should I put at the back end? And they go, some directory name. Maybe not necessarily Microsoft today. We're working to change that. They just give the name and, hey, what's the customer say? Absolutely, I'll take that. If that's the one you're recommending, that's the one I'm going to use. And the only way that you can get into that loop is if you, the vendor, are working very closely with the person building the application. So we very much understand this now, and we are going to invest in making that happen for Active Directory Technologies. Okay, so let's talk about, I said about. Anybody know where I'm from? A? I always ask that. How many people have heard me speak before? Anybody? Okay. Wow, a couple. So I'll reuse this analogy anyway because I love it. I remember that one of the first talks I did, it was a DNS talk, And I was talking about the allowed characters you could use in a DNS name. It was like A to Z, 0 to 9 with a hyphen, and it's Z. You know, people are like, Z. Oh, Z, that's what you mean, right? And someone came up to me later, it was a colleague of mine, I think, came up to me later and said, you know, it's not, you got to remember to say Z. You've got to Americanify you here. And the way you do it is the name of the band is not ZZ Top. That's how you remember it. And that really sticks, actually. Just doesn't sound right. Let's talk about Active Directory in the network operating system directory space. From all accounts, from the customers that we've worked with, we've talked to, the partners that we've talked to, Active Directory deployments are in general going quite well. We're seeing a couple of things. The biggest thing that we get back from customers, or very much near the top, is, hey, we got rid of all those resource domains. We were able to get rid of the chaos in our environment, and we were able to consolidate it under Active Directory. That's sort of the number one benefit that we're seeing echoed from customers today. Replication is going well, even over slow links. There was a lot of doubt early on about how well Active Directory would work when you put it into the scenario where there'd be a lot of slow WAN links. But as it turns out, when you do the analysis, 56K is an embarrassment of riches for Active Directory replication. It's a lot. It's way more than you need for most customers. And you know, in North America, at least 56K is you don't see it anymore, right? Except on dial-up. Usually you're seeing 128, 256, even more. And now in Europe and South America, it's a different story, but they're coming along as well. But in general, replication is going well. And again, I mentioned multiple customers with enormous scale-out. I know of at least 3, and I'm sure there are more. And I'm sure there are more because I didn't know about those first 3 because they came and told me. We sort of found out after the fact. I'll talk a little bit about what we found out, too, in a moment when we were working with those customers. We see customers who are using the features like group policy, who are using features like find printers to get value back out of their deployment immediately. Which brings me to my final point about the network operating system space, and that is, in order to get one of these things deployed, you have to appeal to the IT pro. Yeah, and you appeal to the IT pro by giving him some new capability or lowering his total cost of ownership. That's what it's all about in the NOS space. It's not really about apps. It's about your ability to effectively manage the environment as it grows. So that's where we focus when we think about the network operating system space. Now, we've also learned a few things about directory deployment. Not only is Active Directory much different technology, new technology from what came previously, NT4, or even other directories that people were used to deploying, it also introduces a bunch of new cross-group dependencies that, in something we didn't anticipate, caused a lot of slowdown in directory deployment, right? People that you never had to talk to before. You didn't even know they existed, really. They were in the elevator, but, you know, well, who's that, you know? You didn't know who they were. Now, all of a sudden, your very job relied on getting something out of them, right? Now, I've had consultants mention this to me as, or one consultant called this the 3-beer approach, the 3 beers approach to Active Directory design. That is, first, you buy a beer for the guy who runs DNS in your organization, right? Then you buy a beer for the guy who runs the network and the network address assignment, right? And then you buy a beer for the guy who runs Exchange, okay? And that's, you know, maybe you sort of worked it with those guys at arm's length before, especially the DNS guys, because they sort of sat, it's like they were over there, right? And there's this big wall, and they peer over it, and they had Unix over there, and you had NT over here, and you're like, you know. But it's now all of a sudden there's a cooperation that has to happen that never happened before, and that by nature was slow to happen. And it introduced risk, perceived risk, on the part of the customer. Hey, you know, we got to go about this very carefully because we don't have processes for this today. We're going to have to create them. Another thing that customers told us, which was very important, is that planning in and itself was not as easy as it could be, right? As I mentioned before, the documentation that we originally shipped with Windows 2000, with the exception of the deployment planning guide, which was good but didn't get there. You know, the only thing else that we came up with was that 1,500-page distributed systems guide. How does replication work? Oh, well, that's great. But how do I deploy it, right? There's a big leap from understanding the difference between version numbers and update sequence numbers to knowing if it's safe to put a domain controller into a branch office. So this descriptive stuff It wasn't helping people along. The second thing was there were irreversible decisions you had to make during planning that slowed you down. Domains can't be renamed. Customer reaction, well, I better be real careful about picking my name. Real careful. So they went slowly and cautiously. You can't, if you make a schema update, it's there forever. Schema updates are permanent. Whoa, I'm going to think twice about deploying this application because it's going to make me make an irreversible decision. Even if it's a safe decision, it was irreversible, and nobody likes to make those decisions. So those are some of the key feedback we got about deployment. The way that we responded, and we did this in about mid-year of 2001, was to introduce what we call the best practice design and deployment guides. And what we did with best practice design and deployment guides was taking the sum of all our knowledge about customers who deployed Active Directory in the network operating system space. Take that knowledge, think about what people were doing, what were the commonalities, what were the places that were down the sort of the beaten path. Coalesce those into a document where we recommended a very fixed set of scenarios, very fixed set of choices that you could make at each step in your design process, labeled all the steps out one by one so you'd know where to begin and when you were done. Use terminology that was very specific to the NOS scenario, and have a document which basically you could pick this design document up and say, hey, I can deploy with this design and I know it's going to be safe. And not only that, I know if I call product support, they're going to know what I'm talking about, right? And for me, as an engineer in the product group, when the quality assurance people came to me and said, hey, what's the popular customer scenario? Because I want to test the heck out of that one. I give them this document and say, well, they're going to do something in this space. Go ahead and test around that. And they know, hey, that's the beaten path. So we created this beaten path, and we shipped it out, which brings me to what I call my must-read list for Active Directory. And I'm hoping that for those of you in the room who are really day-to-day involved in Active Directory, you've read each one of these papers. Or at least you know about each one of these papers and know what the contents are. The first two are the best practice design guides. One's the design guide, one's the deployment guide. You can find these, by the way, if you go to Microsoft.com/Active Directory. Very easy, Microsoft.com/Active Directory. Another problem people had was if you go to Microsoft.com and in the search box you put Active Directory, you get like 50,000 hits. Okay, that's not good. We needed a home page where people could go and get all this information. So we created a WAC Active Directory portal site. There's a planning and deployment link. If you follow that link, you'll find these papers. The best practice guides are out there. They can be used by anyone. One very important thing to note about the best practice guides, though, and a lot of the sort of the more higher-powered consultants come to me and say, hey, is this the only way to do things? Is this the only way we should deploy Active Directory and every other way is kind of dangerous? And the answer is no. It's perfectly valid to use Active Directory in ways that are outside of best practices. But if you do that, you should know what the ramifications are. So you should be doing that from fundamentals, from first principles. I understand how the system works, so I can make this decision. And for the better system integrators in the room, you can feel perfectly confident doing that with your customer. Because the best practice design isn't always going to be the optimal design. Right? It's going to be safe, but not necessarily optimal. How many people, by the way, have seen and read those two top papers? Oh, I'm hoping for more. Every conference I go to, I ask that question. Then I get more hands every time, but I want to see everyone raise their hand. I want to be on everyone's bedside table, right? It will help you get to sleep. It was amazing the process that we undertook. How many people here know Andreas Luther? Anybody? Andreas? Yeah, everybody knows Andreas, man. Great guy. Is he here? Okay. I only say that. He works for me, so I don't want to inflate his ego too much. But yeah, we spent a lot of time with a lot of people, a lot of late nights, a lot of Chinese food, getting those papers out. A 2-month stretch where we didn't go home, and we got that out for TechEd of last year. So it's the product of a lot of very hard thinking. The third document on this list is very, very important. I'll read the whole title. Delegation of Administration and Active Directory. Achieving Autonomy and Isolation Using Forest Domains and Organizational Units. How many people have read this paper? Anybody? A couple. Okay. This is very, very important. And it's important for the following reason. When we shipped Windows 2000, the bulk of the documentation had statements in it of the following nature. The domain is a security boundary. Right. The domain is a security boundary, but it's not a perfect boundary of isolation. And there are customers out there who require perfect isolation in certain cases. And the examples are fairly numerous, but you'll recognize them when you see them. Financial organizations sometimes have this. Governments, military, defense contractors have situations where by law or by some regulation, certain kinds of data can only be seen by certain kinds of people, period. If that is ever violated, they could lose their ability to do business. Okay? And there's an example I'll give that hopefully will bring this out for you, and that is in Switzerland. If you run a Swiss private bank, then the only people who can see data about clients of your Swiss private bank are people who are in Switzerland, physically in Switzerland. If they're outside of Switzerland, they can see the data. You could lose your license, and you will no longer be allowed to to run a private bank in Switzerland. So, let's say you're running a bank and you decide that you want to create a single forest deployment, and hey, your bank actually, your financial institution stretches far beyond Switzerland of itself. Well, you're in a situation where administrators in other parts of your organization could potentially access data in Switzerland. And you either have to accept that risk or you have to design around it. So it's very important that people who are in these situations, it's actually absolutely essential, people in this situation read this document. And everyone else should as well, to be prepared. It's not very long. It's about 20 pages, and it's eye-opening. So I do recommend everybody read that document. The last document I think is very important is the Active Directory Branch Office Guide. And if you're doing a branch office deployment, this is essential. If you're not doing a branch office deployment, it's still kind of interesting reading. There's a lot of stuff that we learned working with some early deployments that we captured about operations of the product, that we captured in that documentation, and we're in the process of sort of extracting that out and making sure it lands in the right documents in the right context. But in the meanwhile, reading this document is a very good idea. A couple of other things that we're working on, because we're still not done in the prescriptive design guide space. Number one, you can also find the Domain Migration Cookbook. Helps you a lot when you're doing NT4 to Windows 2000 migrations. DNS, another very popular stumbling block for some customers. There's a seminar that you can get on Microsoft.com that walks you through the popular ways of integrating into an existing DNS structure. That stuff is captured in the best practice guides, but this is targeted and specific, so if you need more information, you can go there. Coming soon, we have a document we call Best Practice Active Directory Design for Exchange 2000. Chapter 1, Buy More Beer for the Exchange guys. Right? This document, we hope, will help very specifically detail the things that the Active Directory person needs to know and the thing the Exchange person needs to know when they're about to deploy Exchange into an existing Active Directory environment or when no Active Directory exists. This is a very, very popular issue. Within a large organization, there may be one set of guys or people, let's say, one set of guys and gals who deploy or work on Windows Server. Then there's another set of people who do messaging, right? They're separate. And if the messaging guys decide they want to go to Exchange 2000 before the server guys decide they want Active Directory, then you've got a funny situation. How do you get through it? What are your choices? This document's going to describe that. It's very close to being done at this point, and we hope to have it out before the end of the first quarter of this year, calendar first quarter. Another document we're working on, again a very popular situation, is what do you do with Active Directory when you've got firewalls inside your network? Or even when you have a firewall between you and your extranet, or some servers you have out on an external network, and you want to manage some sort of access or authentication there. How do you do it? And it's more than just how do I replicate through a firewall. Actually, how do you replicate through a firewall is the smallest part of the problem, because there's replication if you're in the same domain, if you're in different domains in the same forest. There's trust if you're in the same forest, if you're in the same domain, if you're in different forests across external trust, if you're a member machine separated by the Active Directory by a firewall. It goes on and on and on. We're covering all of those scenarios in this paper. Along the way, we've also learned quite a bit about operating the Active Directory. So after you've designed it, after you've deployed it, how do you keep it running? And there's two very important conclusions that I want everyone to know, and that is, number one, without proactive monitoring, you don't know if your system's healthy. And the Active Directory is an amazing thing. It was designed with fault tolerance in mind. So when things fail in different places, the system keeps chugging on, it keeps servicing clients, it'll keep going until it just can't go anymore. But you know what? It might find it just can't go anymore for 6 months. It may just look like everything's fine. There's a huge problem. You can't see it unless you're looking in your event log. And kudos to all of you who do actually look in your event log. I know I don't look in my event log. And I should, damn it. But the fault tolerance of the system can hide these from the outside, right? Unless you're looking to see where the system's going, hey, I've got a problem, then you're not going to know you have a problem. And this was most vivid for us when we worked with those early branch office deployments. Let me tell you what happened. Anybody here do a branch office deployment before? Couple do branch? Yeah, an awful lot. Okay. Well, we worked with a couple of customers who weren't doing proactive monitoring. In fact, they weren't even doing a lot of proactive testing of their machines after they built them. And the classic branch office scenario today is you've got your 1,000 branch offices. You want to build up these domain controllers. So what you do is you do it centrally. You build up that domain controller centrally, and then you ship it out on a truck to its actual branch. You just plug it in, right? Because it's too hard to get the expertise out to the branch office. And besides, the link is too slow to do the replication over it anyway. So, hey, you build them centrally. We worked with this one customer who had their hub location, okay, and that's where all the normal network connections were and where the branch offices were connected. And then over here they had a factory. They outsourced the creation of the domain controllers, okay? That was a great little business relationship. They could hook up for a certain period of time. They'd build the DCs. When they were done, they were done. They could end the relationship. Everything's great. But in the factory had a connection back to the hub. At some point when they were building these DCs, the replication connections broke between the factory and the hub. And they were building these DCs that had no idea what the hub looked like, and shipping them out on trucks, and then they'd arrive in the branch office, and they couldn't replicate with the hub. But hey, they were populated, so they'd run for a while. They'd run for a long while before anyone noticed anything was wrong, because nobody was looking in the event log. And funny things can happen when you do this. Let me give you an example. Does everybody understand what happens when you delete an object in the Active Directory? What happens? You get a tombstone created, right? So deletion is really a state of the object. You touch it, you delete it, it just says, okay, I'm tombstoned, we strip some attributes off, and then the tombstone replicates to all the machines, right? And when it's replicated to all the machines, at some later time, a tombstone, after it's been sitting there for a while, and you know that it's gotten all the machines, you just wipe it out of your database. You collect it, right? And a funny thing can happen if I'm a DC and I'm just not replicating, right? I'm not replicating. Stuff is deleted over there, and it gets tombstoned, it gets wiped out, and I never hear about the tombstone. I never hear about the deletion. And then someone realizes, hey, replication's broken. Let's reintroduce this domain controller. So you reintroduce it. I've still got objects on my domain controller that you have no idea what they are anymore because they're gone, right? And maybe I make a modification on this object. And that goes, oh, well, I got to replicate that object out now. So when replication happens, that object comes back into the network. We have a very technical term for that. Zombies, right? And the zombies come back into the network. And that can be trouble if they're user objects that you really meant to delete, for example. Actually, we call them lingering objects because zombies, I guess, didn't get by the technical writers. But I tried. These things can happen if you're not monitoring. And it just so happened that right about the time we were learning about this with customers, we purchased or licensed the Microsoft Operations Manager product from NetIQ. And Microsoft Operations Manager is a cool product where you have a central monitoring console and these agents that go to the machines, and then they do the health monitoring of the individual machine and then forward the relevant information up to the console. This is very, very good for an Active Directory, or works really, really well with an Active Directory deployment. You get the agents out onto all the domain controllers with the Active Directory Management Pack. This is a management pack that's a plug-in to MOM that understands how to monitor Active Directory. And it can tell you, hey, all the machines are running great, or hey, there's something wrong here on this machine. Please come take a look at it. I highly, highly, highly recommend the use of MOM with any deployment of any kind of scale. If you're managing more than 10 machines, you should really think about this. And that's just a number I pulled out of the air. But it's more than you're going to go look at the event logs every day. In fact, if you were to look at the event logs every day, you'd probably still be quite depressed because there's an awful lot of data in the event log. And what the Microsoft, or what the Active Directory Management Pack does is call out the interesting bits. So that is very, very useful. Anybody here using MOM to monitor Active Directory? A couple. Right. It's too expensive. Okay, that's a fair piece of feedback. Moving on. There's a couple of other things, and we should discuss that. Actually, at the Ask the Experts, you should bring that up. You should find a guy who has vice president in the title of his. I'm serious, and tell him. You tell him what you think. We're listening. Another thing that we've learned is operational techniques that people had learned were tried and true over the many years of using NT4. Okay, the tried and true operational techniques for that simply don't work with Active Directory. Okay, the technique for resyncing a BDC by deleting its machine account or resetting its machine account and then doing a resync with Server Manager, do that with a domain controller and you'll find yourself with a very rude surprise. You've killed it. It can be quite difficult to recover from that situation. Now, hey, here's another case where we gave you 1,500 pages of how it works. What we really need to give you is a guide that's prescriptive. Here's how you operate the product. If you enter this situation, this is what you do about it. This is what you don't do, right? If you find that files aren't replicating between sysvols on two domain controllers, what don't you do? Don't copy the files manually from one to the other. It seems obvious, and I don't blame people who do it. But what happens is, you got file A over here, it's got a replicated copy over here. When you copy it, it looks like you've created another file A over here, and it starts to replicate out. And heaven forbid, you should do this on many, many domain controllers, because you end up with a huge storm of replication on the sysvol. So, hey, these are things that we need to give guidance on, and the good news is, we are going to give guidance on this in two segments. Number one, even if you get MOM today and use the Active Directory Management Pack, you may be curious about what are the key health indicators for Active Directory. So we're going to publish a guide which is a technical reference that describes what are the key health indicators for Active Directory. We expect to have that one out by the end of the first quarter of this year.
Based on MOM or performance counters?
The question was, is it based on MOM or is it based on performance counters? It's based on everything. What events you need to look for in the event log, what perf counters are good to look at in trend, et cetera, et cetera. So that will be useful. Another guide that we want to come out with is a step-by-step guide to using MOM to monitor Active Directory. It's not still entirely obvious once you've got it installed what you do to actually monitor the system and how do you react to certain events. So we want to get that out as well, and instructions on how to do setting baselines and doing trending for things like that. Because maybe you do use an awful lot of memory on your DCs right now, but you're in steady state and it's okay. You don't need to be throwing thresholds or alerts at thresholds saying, hey, I'm running out of memory. Maybe that's perfectly valid for your particular deployment. You need to set a baseline to do that. How do you set a baseline? We'll have a discussion in this doc. Now, one thing I do want to caution you. We will give you that first document that talks about the key health indicators. But unless you build monitoring software for a living, please do not try to build your own homegrown monitoring solution like in-house. We've done this, and it's non-trivial. And the only thing worse than not monitoring is monitoring and not doing it right, because then you really think you're okay and you're not. So I really highly recommend, number one, if you don't do it for a living, use MOM or some other product. Preferably by some vendor who says they've worked with us. And if you are a vendor that builds monitoring software for a living, please come talk to us, and we'll help you build the intelligence into your product. A couple of other things we're working on. a series of 2 documents on best practice operations. One's at the top of the second list and the other one's at the bottom. The first one is about managing the service configuration of Active Directory. So things like, how do you reintroduce a domain controller when it's been long disconnected? What do you do if you're running out of disk space on a domain controller? What do you do if the sysvol is not syncing on 2 DCs? We want that to be included in this first document on best practices for service configuration management. We want to have that one out by the end of the second quarter, or sometime in the second quarter of this year. The last one on the list is about data administration. There's a real big, we're creating a new segmentation between different kinds of administrators in AD. There are administrators who manage the service. There are administrators who manage data inside it. Okay? And when you're managing data inside it, I'm talking about things like, how do you find stale machine accounts? How do you find stale user accounts? What's the best way to manage ACLs in sub-OUs? Stuff like that. So that's the data administration guide. We don't have a plan for the data administration guide yet, because all of our writers are tied up doing the other documents I talked about. So as soon as we start finishing up on those, we'll be able to get them going on the data administration guide. The second bullet here is kind of interesting, a process that we call forest-wide business recovery. And we'll have a paper out on forest-wide business recovery, hopefully by sometime in the second quarter of this year. And what is forest-wide business recovery? Well, let's say, hypothetical situation. Let's say somehow on your Active Directory forest, you had a corruption which got to all of your domain controllers and you couldn't get rid of it. You'd called PSS. PSS engaged the development group. We figured out what had triggered the problem, but there was no way to purge it. Let's say that happened. Heaven forbid that happened. How would you recover your environment? Because sort of just leaving it for dead isn't going to work. Your business is left for dead then. So how do you get everything going again? Well, if you read this guide, you'll learn how you take backups in the right way, and then how you can use those backups to recover your entire environment by rolling back in time to a point when you knew the environment was not corrupted, and then rebuilding everything from there. It's a heavyweight event. It's the last line of defense in case something like this happens. I can tell you that last Saturday night we practiced this in the NT group. We have a force that's dedicated to the NT Dev group. There's some couple thousand. I can't remember how many thousand. You know how many thousand we have, Andreas? Users? 3,000, I think. Between 3,000. 3,000 users. And the stuff in there was things like the NT source code and all that. It's all connected to this one forest. And we destroyed it. And we rebuilt it from scratch in one evening. And everybody knew it was going to happen. But my experience with it was, I left my desk on Friday. I came in on Saturday. I watched the guys doing the work. I played some Xbox. Okay. And then when they said the environment was back and live in a skeleton sense, I went back to my machine, unlocked it, checked my mail. It was like nothing had happened. That made me feel very good. Okay. The procedure has many, many steps. And you have to get them in the right order. So it's important that you get familiar with this document. And by the way, if there are any backup vendors in the audience, there may be an opportunity here to partner and create an automated way to do this. I have the feeling that some people would pay real money for that. So we're going to be soliciting backup vendors on that to help create some automated ways of doing this. Now, just to give you an idea, there were only 15 domain controllers in this forest, but some of them were in Japan. And I think that's as far away as it went. Yeah, most of them were here, but they were in various buildings. And it was a really interesting process. Finally, the last thing that we want to do in the operations area is put a section up on that Active Directory portal site that is about hot topics. Anybody ever heard of link tracking, distributed link tracking? Distributed, maybe a couple people. Distributed link tracking is a funny, not funny, haha, funny, strange application that uses Active Directory by default in Windows 2000. And not many people can explain what it does, but the actual effect that you see is you see a lot of link tracking objects in your directory. I don't know how many people have actually gotten a tool out that could list all the different kinds of objects in the directory. But hey, we were surprised one day when we went and looked in the corporate Active Directory at Microsoft and found some 3 million. Andreas, was it 3 million or 4 million link tracking objects? 3 million link, 3 million seems like a popular number. 3 million link tracking objects that were doing very little for anybody. So we devised a way to clean them up properly, and things like that. It's caught in a KB article, but probably a lot of people don't know about it. And I want to be able to get that out to people, and the way we're going to do that is through this Active Directory portal. So I would watch for that. And then we'll talk about the latest QFEs. We'll talk about the recommended latest service pack level for your domain controllers, and so on.
Thank you very much for doing these papers. It seems that some of the recommendations would be different for different versions of AD. Are these going to be scoped to 2000 or .NET?
So the question was, the documentation, will it be specific, or will there be specific documentation for the Windows 2000 version of Active Directory versus the Windows.NET version? And right now our priority is getting the data out for Windows 2000, and there will be versions for .NET where operational practices are different. And in a lot of cases the technology is so similar that you don't have to worry about that, but we'll call it out when it's different for the various types. And one thing that's very important, this is personally very important to me, you've heard of Bill Gates' Trustworthy Computing Initiative. And the Windows team has actually been given a great mandate, I'm not sure if this was discussed in the general sessions, to work on the security of the product. And one of the things that means to me is we need to be able to give customers guidance on what it means to run a secure Active Directory. And what does that mean? That means exactly this. We want to have a document, I'm calling it right now, Securing Active Directory, that contains the following 4 pieces of data. Number 1, all of the potential threats that could attack your Active Directory, including those that come from rogue administrators. Okay? If you have an administrator who he's going to be fired the next day or something like that, he wants to do as much damage as he can, what do you do? Well, or what could he do? What could he or she do? So number 1, what are all the threats? Number 2, how do you mitigate the risk of those attacks once you know what they are? Number 3, how would you know if an attack was in progress? How would you detect it? And number 4, if you detected an attack was in progress, what would you do about it? This documentation we are working on very hard right now. We will have an outline for it by the end of this month. At that point in time, I will be able to figure out how long it's going to take us to write the actual content. But it will be coming out quite soon, most likely before the end of the second quarter of this year. And this is, I can't emphasize how important this is to me that we get this out. Over and above all of the other documentation that I've described that's coming, this is our highest priority. Okay. That's kind of the part about the stuff about Active Directory that is very, common and understood to everybody. Let's talk about the application directory role now. How does Active Directory fit in the application directory role? Well, first of all, let's talk about the things that we're seeing in the space of application directory, enterprise directory, and Active Directory. Number 1, there are customers who do the following. Number 1, they deploy a NOS directory, and then number 2, they try to make the NOS directory into an enterprise directory and only have one of them. And this is a fine vision. In fact, it works in certain circumstances. Okay? If the conditions are right, you can end up with one directory that is both the NOS directory and an enterprise directory. That is, all applications are using it. And the conditions are as follows. Number 1, first of all, the application you're using has to have a similar set of requirements that the NOS directory does, right? So if you're going to take an application that wants to store volatile data in a directory, you might not be able to put that into your NOS directory because your NOS directory might be scaled out, right? So they have to be compatible in that sense. I'll talk about what that means a bit in a moment. Number 2, a situation where this almost always works is in a small organization where you have very small scale out and one set of people who do everything. They manage the servers, they manage Active Directory, they manage messaging, everything, right? The small IT shop. For them, this is nirvana. They don't have to manage a bunch of separate directories, they just manage one. And because they control the whole thing, they can do that. we see customers being successful in this space for things like Exchange 2000. Exchange 2000's scale-out requirements are very similar to the scale-out requirements of the NOS. So they match up quite nicely. Now, in larger organizations, this isn't always possible. And it's a challenge for a couple of reasons. Number one, anybody here actually own or work on Exchange 2000 deployments? Some Exchange, okay. So there's a time in every Exchange 2000 deployment where the messaging folks have to answer the following question. Am I willing to rely on the Active Directory folks to deliver the service level I need to keep mail flowing? Am I willing to rely on their directory so that my application will function? In some cases, the answer is no. And the Exchange, the people who run messaging say, I have to have my own directory. And they deploy their own forest for that. Perfectly valid. And there are certain circumstances where it actually works quite nicely. I'll talk about that in a moment. Second thing that can happen is I'm a corporate developer inside a department, and I want to build an Active Directory-enabled application, but I need to extend the schema to do that. Well, I've got to submit some schema change request to some central body, and it may take months for it to be approved. Or they may, even worse, months later they may send it back to me and say you need to make this small change, try again. And that can present a bottleneck to deployment. There's a couple of others here where I haven't mentioned on the slide. One was inside a department, cooperation with other departments in terms of using the directory might not be high on my list of things, priorities, right? My priority is to get my application running. And I don't want to have to deal with anyone else to do it, so I'll just deploy my own directory. And that, again, works against the people who are trying to consolidate their applications onto the single NOS directory. Now, beyond that, again, as I mentioned earlier, applications can have varying requirements that are not compatible with the NOS directory. Scale out is one. The other is that, frankly, a lot of directory-enabled applications were built with another competitor's standalone directory in mind, and they make a lot of assumptions based on that. And when you try to point that application against Active Directory, it doesn't work immediately. So here are some of the challenges that are involved that really prevent the enterprise directory from happening in certain large organizations, at least for certain functions, and then bring about the application directory. Again, the application directory is this idea that you have multiple directories closely associated with given applications and then maybe synchronized with the meta directory. Now, you might be asking yourself, how do I do that today with Active Directory? How would I do application directory with Active Directory in Windows 2000? Well, it looks something like this. Here I've got the NOS forest with its great scale out across the top of the screen. And I have an application here that wants to use the directory. Well, it's perfectly valid for this application to use the NOS directory for authentication and authorization, because those roles are quite compatible. And the other thing that it can also do is service publication. Let's say my app wants to publish itself out so that people can find it. Well, that also is a function that is compatible with the NOS directory. But if you had some volatile data that you wanted to store, you wouldn't want to store that volatile data. Maybe it's a volatile data like, let me give you an example, a fictitious example. Let's say I want to create like an instant messaging server, and I want to have a presence server. I want to know when people are online or offline. Well, you don't want to store that in the NOS directory. You want to store that aside in a dedicated store that's not widely replicated. The way that you can do that is creating what we call an application forest. An application forest, maybe you need the trust, maybe you don't, between the application forest and the NOS forest. But now you can store your volatile data in that application forest. It's dedicated to the application. And then if you need to, you can introduce a meta directory which will sync interesting information from the NOS directory into the application forest. So imagine for a moment that the application forest in this case is an Exchange application forest. That the application is Exchange. Well, what do you need from the NOS forest? You need the list of users that need mailboxes, and you can get that through the meta directory into your application forest. And now you have a dedicated forest that you control and that isn't bound to the requirements set up by maybe someone else who's running the NOS forest. Now you're probably looking at this situation and thinking, that's a little clunky. Anybody thinking that? Clunky? Clunky? Okay, well, it changes. Because this is a roadmap talk. and I'll get to the roadmap. In terms of meta directory today, the MMS 2.2 product has been out there for a while. I'm not going to speak in too much detail about meta directory, except to say that previously there was an issue with getting the meta directory product, MMS 2.2, because the only way to get it was through an engagement of Microsoft Consulting, and not even the broader set of consulting, a specific set of consultants at Microsoft who knew how to deploy the directory. And we've remedied that problem by training some 30-plus partners on how to do MMS deployment. So now it's actually quite easy to get it. It's still a product that customers can't deploy on their own, and as such, it's free today, but you need to buy the consulting contract to get it. And we're working on that in the future. I'll talk a bit about Meta Directory Services 3.0 a little bit later. So let's talk about .NET Server. We finished the state of the directory. We had 3 very simple goals for Windows.NET Server Active Directory. Very simple goals. Number 1, address those deployment issues that were causing a number of customers some heartburn. And those are very generally in that area of flexibility. Things like you have to have a global catalog server, you have to contact a global catalog server to log onto a native mode domain, right? The fact that multi-valued group membership is replicated in whole lists instead of replicating just changes. The fact that you couldn't rename domains. The fact that schema changes could not be changed after they were put in place. All those things we are fixing. If you go to some of the later talks, the deployment to Windows.NET talk, or deploying Windows.NET talk, the branch office talk, the mergers and acquisitions talk on Active Directory, you can find out more about those features. Along the way, as we built those features, we kept one very important thing in mind, and that was, no matter what we build, it must not require any customer to go back on any decision they'd made in their previous deployment. That would be really bad. That would cause people to freeze up, right? So we made it a goal, more than a goal, it was a requirement that any feature be able to easily integrate into a previously deployed Windows 2000 environment. And I believe that we have achieved that goal. The second thing was to broaden these application directory scenarios. Allow the storage of volatile data. Help people port applications from the popular competitor directory. And support the latest and greatest in tools for building applications. In the .NET framework, there is now a way to access Active Directory, System.Directory Services, or sometimes called ADSI.NET. You can find out more about that in Andy Harianto's Accessing Active Directory from the .NET Framework and XML talk. Finally, we wanted to make a lot of general engineering improvements. Anybody here was around during the Windows NT 3.1 days? 3.1 NT? Yeah, a couple. That's actually before my time. 3.1 to 3.5, I showed up around the 3.5 time frame. 3.5 was a project that we called the Daytona project in the Windows NT group because the objective was to make its footprint smaller and make it faster. 3.1 was a bit clunky. 3.5 really brought it into its own, and Windows.NET Server has that mandate. We want to make it smaller footprint and faster. Now, a funny thing happened as we did this. We added some features, we improved performance. It may all come out in the wash, but you'll get the new features. A second thing we wanted to do was 64-bit support. That is, enable 64-bit Active Directory. And we've done that, and you can do it. It's interesting to a particular set of customers, though. It's interesting to customers who, on their domain controllers, have a cache working set of greater than 1 gigabyte, or that is pushed the 1 gigabyte envelope. Today, you can only have the in-memory cache of the directory be 1 gigabyte. And if it gets bigger than that, or if now you need to access data that's outside the cache, even though you've got all that stuff in memory, you've got to go to disk to get it. And at that point, you become I/O bound because you're trying to get stuff off the disk all the time. What 64-bit lets you do is put gobs of memory into the domain controller so that the whole thing can get loaded into memory. I tried to ask one of the developers what the new limit was, and he said, "Don't worry about it. It's up there." Arun at the back of the room could probably tell you at Ask the Experts night what that limit is, but it's big. So there's a set of customers who run probably large outward-facing directories that this will be interesting for. We're not sure if it's interesting in many, or hosting scenarios as well, those outward-facing hosting scenarios. In the typical NOS environment, we haven't quite identified places where this will be terribly useful, but we think it may be useful in cases where you have very large exchange environments running, and you have those DCs that are using Exchange quite vigorously to send mail. Another word about 64-bit, you can mix and match 64-bit and 32-bit domain controllers at will, no problem. Do whatever you want. You can mix and match, you can put 64-bit DCs into a Windows 2000 forest. Doesn't matter. It's all abstracted on the wire. So, I mentioned that the situation's getting better as we go to Windows.NET here for the application directory scenario. Let's move the app forest out of the picture for a moment. The app forest is still going to be useful in certain scenarios, but now you have another option with Windows.NET, and that is the usage of this thing that we call the application partition. The application partition is a partition you can create on any given domain controller in a forest, and you can then use that dedicated by an application. So in this case, the app will continue to do its authentication and authorization service publication against the normal Active Directory, but it will store its volatile data in the application partition. That volatile data will stay in that application partition on that DC and go nowhere else. It doesn't show up in the global catalog. It doesn't automatically go to any other DC. It's only there. Or, if you so choose, you can put it on other DCs as well. You can create as many copies of that application partition as you want. So now you have that flexibility for that application that has a differing need than the normal NOS. You can now use the application partition to get where you want to go. Now, the application forest is still going to be appropriate in many cases. If you can imagine Exchange, for example, Exchange can't use app partitions. Exchange needs full-fledged user objects, which you can't store in application partitions. So that will still want to use the app forest. But this is going to be a solution for many things. An example of that is, and our flagship user for application partitions is directory-enabled DNS. Those of you who are familiar with directory-enabled DNS today know that the DNS data is stored in the domain NC, so it goes to all of the domain controllers in a domain, whether they're running the DNS server or not. What application partitions allow us to do is only replicate the DNS data to domain controllers that are running DNS. And, even better, well, that's kind of cool, but what's even better is it keeps the data out of the GC, which means if you're like us here at Microsoft, we have lots and lots of machines and lots of DNS objects, which go to lots and lots of GCs. Some 160 GCs get this data. They don't want this data. It's only useful to the domain controllers in the domains running the DNS server. And this gets it out of there. You get a lot of disk space back on those GCs. After you've deleted the objects and after they've tombstoned out. Remember, when you delete objects in the directory, they just get tombstoned. So don't expect to get a whole bunch of space back until they're garbage collected. But for heaven's sakes, don't game the system and do things like roll the clock forward on the domain controller trying to get the garbage collection process to go faster. Because what happens if you do that? Zombies. Right, okay. I digress. So a couple of things that I think are interesting to know about Windows.NET Server. Number one, if you're a system integrator, know that there's going to be an awful lot of NT4 upgrades, as well as quite a few Windows 2000 upgrades. But expect people to be going from NT4 to straight to Windows.NET. It's going to happen. Comment on our deployment internally here in Microsoft. One of the things that we do here at Microsoft, of course, is self-host our own products so that we know that they're ready. I mean, if they're not going to work for us, they're not going to work for paying customers. So we make sure that we try all of the features of the product. We have deployed Beta 3 plus some QFEs in our corporate environment, actually in staggering numbers. We have 152, at least we had 152. Is it more now, Andreas? How many are we at? About right. This was a couple of days ago. 152 of 248 DCs upgraded. And we're upgrading them at a rate, we were upgrading them at a rate of about almost 10 a day. Almost 5% of the environment a day. And it was going really well. We're working on a bug right now, and that has stopped the deployment. But this is going very, very well. In fact, I think some of our ITG people would say that the Windows.NET version of the product is somewhat superior quality to the Windows 2000 version. That they may debate that, but that's sort of what we're seeing. We intend to go into forest mode That is, have all of the domain controllers upgraded and press the button, which takes us to the next level of functionality sometime in the first week of March. And of course, we'll have a very big party. That's what we always do, the development group. We'll have a huge party. We'll be here all night, because this is the kind of thing that the ITG folks like to do on Friday at 7. Question?
Yeah, are you seeing any interoperability problems between .NET?
Right, the question was, are we seeing any interoperability problems? And there seems to be a rumor going around. Actually, we're familiar with this rumor.
You paid for it by having to come here.
Yeah. Well, there's a funny story behind that. Yeah, there is a rumor that Windows 2000 Active Directory and Windows.NET Active Directory don't interoperate very well. And that is not true. They interoperate just fine. They are fully compatible. To do anything else would be ill-advised for us to build a product that did not interoperate. There'd be no way to upgrade. Right? Upgrade of a distributed system necessarily requires a slow stage deployment. And what happened was the rumor came from a consulting group who issued a statement. They said they felt that, well, they were recommending against it for whatever reason. When we saw the recommend against, we were surprised. We contacted the group. We worked with the author, and he printed a subsequent paper which removed that caveat. And I guess the word didn't quite get out to everyone. So, and unfortunately, the paper is only available to the customers of that consulting group. So if you happen to be a customer of that consulting group, please feel free to go look for that document. It's by an analyst named John Enck, E-N-C-K. Write that down. So you can take a look for that. But absolutely, it's interoperable. The only thing that you have to remember is when you're in .NET Forest mode, you can't put Windows 2000 DCs in the environment anymore. They are not allowed in anymore because they don't understand the new features. They don't understand how to do per-value replication of group membership. To leave them in there would be dangerous. So we not only cut them off if they're still in there, and by our checks and balances try to keep them out, we don't let new ones get promoted in. Okay. Quick note on MMS 3.0. The MMS 3.0 product, the big thrust there is threefold, or maybe twofold. Number one, standardize. Standardize on the store that we use for MMS 3.0. Standardize on the programming model that we use inside MMS 3.0. And finally, take a dramatic step forward in the ease of use of the product. Okay, we want ordinary people to be able to deploy this for very common scenarios like multiple forests and Exchange 2000. If you want to do gal sync, it should be very easy. So that's one of the goals. I want to move on, though, beyond this, to talk about what's going on beyond Windows.NET. A couple of quick things, and if you hold the questions to the end, because my time is running short. And this is where things get kind of interesting. Now, I'm going to talk about some stuff that's beyond Windows.NET. I can't tell you what release of the product this stuff's going to be in, but I can tell you that this is where we're thinking. And I can tell you some things will happen sooner than you may expect. First of all, the network operating system space. Multi-forest deployment is essential, that we master that we kill it, that we get it, right? We have to get everything that customers need to run multiple forest deployments. We need that because there are customers out there who have to do it for those isolation requirements I talked about earlier, that paper. We have to do that because we want to enable grassroots deployment in organizations. We want to do that so that we can enable mergers and acquisitions in a very big way. There are two things that we're thinking about, which I haven't put on the slide. You have to see me say them. Okay, because they're just the way we're thinking, right? This is what 5 o'clock on a Friday, beer in hand, we talk about things we could do that'd be really cool, okay? Now, one of the problems with multiple forests is global catalog is scoped to a single forest today. Now, ask yourself, what's bigger than global? What's bigger than global? Universal, yeah, universal catalog. That'd be a really cool name for a feature, wouldn't it? Imagine the following. Imagine this. I'm a global catalog server in a forest. Okay, I'm a global catalog server. What am I? I've got a full copy of my domain NC. I've got partial copies of all of the domain NCs from the other domains in the forest. Right? I've got partial copies. Now imagine. Okay, I could also host partial copies of domains from other forests, but they looked like they were part of the GC. And when I queried, I could find those objects. And then when I tried to get a full copy of the object, like today, I got vectored to the domain that owned the object. And it was in another forest. That'd be pretty cool. Universal Catalog. That's a great name. I like that. Thank you for that. The second thing we're thinking about that's very important for mergers and acquisitions scenario is the ability to move a domain from one forest to another. We think we know how we could do this. It's a great deal of work. But it's something that we think is absolutely essential so that our multi-forest story is complete. The second thing that we want to do is in this area of manageability. You all know this. Today, when you look at a domain controller and you want to service the domain controller, in order to log on and adjust the configuration settings, you have to be an administrator of the directory. Not an administrator of the machine, an administrator of the directory. Ouch, right? So that makes management a bit of a challenge. So imagine a world. Imagine a world where every machine was a member server. Some happen to be running the directory service, right? So there was not really a domain controller anymore. In the same way that some servers were running IIS, the web server, some servers were running AD, the directory service. And if you think of it that way, what are the things you could do? Well, I can log on to that machine and it has its own dedicated security database and I don't have to be administrator of the directory anymore. That's one thing I can do. I can stop the directory. I can patch its binaries and bring it back up again without rebooting the machine. I can stop the directory. I can do low-level maintenance on the database and bring it back up and I didn't have to reboot the machine. Everything else on that machine kept running in that time. So that's the thing we're doing. Now, one thing that's very important, this does not relieve you of your obligation to physically secure the machine and to make sure that the administrators who get access to the machine are very well trusted. Okay, this does not solve that problem, but it does eliminate the chance of making mistakes. Let's say you have a technician who you do absolutely trust, and you want him to go install the updated virus scanner on the domain controller, and he accidentally deletes North America in the process, right? Because, oh, that's an interesting snippet. I've never been in there before. Okay, this would eliminate that possibility. In the application directory space, two things. Ignore the first bullet for a moment. I have a picture. The second thing we want to do is continue to evolve the programmatic tools used to build applications on the directory. And there's a couple of things that we're doing in that space. DSML, an XML way of representing and accessing directory data, is very close to being available. And that sort of opens up a whole new way of programming the directory where you don't have to understand LDAP anymore. Moving forward, we want to support more and more of the aspects of the .NET framework, things like dataset support, so that you can manipulate Active Directory data the same way you'd manipulate ordinary database data. Now let's take a look at the application directory. In this space, remember, we had the application partition. We were storing our volatile data in it. Let's take some stuff out of the picture here. Let's move that application partition right onto the machine that's running the app. Okay? And we'll store our local data that's local to the app on that partition. It's on the machine running the app. We'll still put that global data like service publication stuff into the NOS for us. Okay? And we'll have the meta directory do that sync of the data that we want to pull out of the NOS, maybe a list of users, pull it out of the NOS directory, put it in my local directory so that I can get local access to it. And maybe if I want, have multiple copies of that local data on multiple machines that are running the application. So what we've done is we've taken this dependence on the directory, on the NOS directory, for the application partition, and instead allowed a purely standalone version of the directory to run on a machine so that you have that, you're really tightly bound to this particular directory. This is something that we are very, very interested in building. So in this picture, you see all three prongs. Remember the roles: network operating system directory, application directory, meta directory. This is how we're going to address all three of those roles. And this is how we were going to realize that vision of one directory technology for all the different scenarios. And we haven't announced this application directory yet, but, well, you may see it sooner than you think. Okay, a final word on things we're doing beyond Active Directory. So a couple of new scenarios we're interested in doing. Massive scaling is one. Massive scaling is that case where you have the outward-facing portal where you have 10 million customers, 20 million customers that you want to have on some application that's facing out on the internet. And you need to do authentication and authorization for those 10 million users. Well, today, you can do that with Active Directory, but as the scale gets greater and greater, some funny things happen. And the main problem is this. Let's say that you have a directory and you have some number of millions and millions of users and some number of concurrent users, okay? So there's this many people in the database and this many people come and access you regularly. It's this many people, the concurrent users that access you, that determines the number of DCs you need to service those requests, right? Okay, so you have a number of DCs you need. Well, the number of DCs you have determines the replication latency in the system. The more DCs you have, the longer it takes for changes to propagate, right? And you can run into this problem where if your scale gets so great, so that you need so many DCs, that your replication latency is getting longer and longer, and you run into this, the instant-on problem, as we call it, where when people want to come sign up for your service, you go and you create their object, and it starts to replicate through the system, but in the meanwhile, before it reaches all the DCs, you've got to like show them ads or something like that, install them, and it's like, just wait, your mailbox is ready almost in a minute. You got to wait 30 seconds, you know? Can you imagine what it would be like if you had to wait 30 seconds for your Hotmail account to be active? Although I bet they probably put enough stuff up in front of you. Well, anyway, it's a bad experience. You want to have that bang replication. So the way we're imagining doing this is, hey, here's how you constrain the problem. First of all, you build forests with a very specific number of users in them. So you know how many users are going to be in each forest. Let's say I pick 1 million. I'm going to build forests with 1 million users in them. I'm going to build as many million object forests as I need to fill out my back end. So if I have 10 million, I'll have 10 forests. And what I'm going to do is build a shim I can put on top of these forests so that the application thinks it's talking to one forest, but the shim is routing the request to the right forest. That's what we call a forest chooser, and it's something that we're interested in so we can enable these massive scaling scenarios. Federation, another thing we're interested in doing, being the identity on the internet, a convergence of Hailstorm, Passport, Active Directory, so that we have common identity. And then finally, some new ways of bringing the Active Directory to the end user. I don't have time to talk about that because I do want to leave 2 minutes for questions before you have to go to your next session. But to stay up to date, again, watch our portal page, watch our news group. You'll get these slides later so you can find out where these things are. The challenge, again, is on the Active Directory team to build those partnerships so that, again, we can be successful through the applications and the system integrators, getting our products deployed. There's my email address. You'll also have that in the slide deck. Finally, I hope that you agree that the vision we've played out is one that will be an industry-leading vision for directories. And not only are we executing on that now, but we have the right plan moving forward to get there in the future. Thank you very much. And I'll take questions now for a minute or so. Go ahead. When are the slides going to be made available? I'm actually not sure. They're burning a CD for you, though. And they'll be available sometime after the event. I'd ask one of the event coordinators to give you a better idea of that. Go ahead.
So you're interested in working with ISVs that have application directories? Is there a program for that?
Email me. I'll get you. I have a guy who works for me. He's dedicated to getting people hooked up on that, and we will work closely with you on that. Okay. Actually, I will be at Ask the Experts tomorrow night, and I want to make sure you're not late or don't get a bad seat at your next session. So feel free to ask questions then. The whole Active Directory program management team will be there. Thank you very much for coming.